The headlines this hour: the UN calls for the trial of those behind the recent US killing of Afghan women and children. Former American Vice President Al Gore says democracy has been hacked in the United States. South American states back Argentina's sovereignty over the UK-occupied Malvinas Islands. And oil remains above $126 per barrel following Iran's response to EU oil sanctions. Hello everyone and welcome to the news here on Press TV. UN Chief Ban Ki-moon has called for the punishment of those involved in the recent killing of 18 Afghan civilians. In a statement, Ban said he expects that an investigation into the killings will rapidly establish facts. He also urged all authorities and military personnel to pay extreme and utmost care to protect civilians. Earlier, US President Barack Obama announced that Washington will probe the murders.
And it does not represent our military. For that reason, I've directed the Pentagon to make sure that we spare no effort in conducting a full investigation. And we will make sure that anybody who was involved is held fully accountable with the full force of the law.
Early on Sunday, a number of US soldiers went on a door-to-door killing spree in several villages in the southern Kandahar province. The victims include 9 children and 3 women. The bloodshed has fueled anti-American sentiment in the war-torn country. Fresh anti-US demonstrations have been held, with protesters calling for the immediate trial of perpetrators of the murders. Former US Vice President Al Gore says it's time for an Occupy Democracy movement to fix America's political system. Gore says action is needed to mend what he called a no longer functional US government. He says American democracy has been hacked and dominated by corporate interests. The former vice president adds that the influence of money in politics has grown to the point that money has become a proxy for a vote. Gore was speaking at a gathering of technology experts, entrepreneurs and journalists in the city of Austin. Meanwhile, in the US, Occupy DC demonstrators have gathered outside the White House to show their outrage at President Barack Obama's signing of a controversial anti-protest law. H.R. 347 outlaws many forms of protests and has been dubbed the End of Dissent law.
347 specifically states that if you have the intent, willful intent, to be in an area protesting while Secret Service are present, then you're subject to being arrested. And this is in direct contradiction of the First Amendment, we believe.
The Federal Restricted Buildings and Grounds Improvement Act of 2011 was originally passed in 1971 and has since been amended a couple of times. Civil liberties groups say the law violates the right to assembly, which is a crucial part of the democratic process.
347.
Meanwhile, more American citizens have fallen victim to the excessive use of force by US police. At least 3 unarmed African American citizens have been shot by US police since early February. The incidents cast further doubts on US claims about human rights. Here's a report.
Pallbearers carrying the coffin of an American teenager shot to death by the U.S. police in the Harlem neighborhood of New York City. Ramerly Graham was hit in February inside his father's home. Police first claimed he was armed, but later it turned out that Graham was unarmed when he was killed.
Nothing. And I can't get no answers. Why this happened? Why is that happened? Why?
Ramerly is not the only victim of recent police brutality. In California, police have killed a decorated Marine in front of his children. Police say Sergeant Manuel Loggins Jr. was a threat to his children. but friends and colleagues of the former soldier have described him as anything but violent. Another young man was severely wounded in Oakland. 24-year-old Tony Jones was shot in the back by police as he tried to run away from them. He was also unarmed. Again in February, footage emerged of an unarmed, handcuffed girl being tased by Florida police. 20-year-old Danielle Maudsley is still in a coma. The officer who tasered her has been cleared of any wrongdoing. The U.S. issues annual reports about human rights violations in other countries. Such reports usually target those nations whom the U.S. government considers as adversary. Amnesty International has slammed Washington over the matter, condemning it for, quote, criticizing other countries' behavior while failing to uphold proper standards itself.
Now, fresh revelations about the U.S. foreign exchange program. Reports say dozens of high school students from abroad have been sexually abused by their American host parents. An exclusive report by NBC News has revealed that at least 4 exchange students were sexually abused over the course of 2 years by the same host father, Dole Mayer.
He would ask me to lay on his chest when he was watching TV, like coming next to him and just come and lay on my chest, trying to get away. And I turned around and he started to do it also on my chest and started to going down and down. Yeah, it is my host father.
He touched places that he shouldn't have touched. I was very afraid that he would send me home because my parents would be very disappointed.
The organisation that placed them with Mayer, Educational Resource Development that is, has been accused of orchestrating a cover-up to protect its reputation. The organisation kicked out one of the exchange students from the programme instead of excluding the host father. The programme, overseen by the US State Department, brings over 25,000 teens from around the world to America.
Swept under the rug, concealed, absolutely every parent's nightmare.
Well, now, South American countries have once again backed Argentina's sovereignty over the Malvinas Islands.
Evidently, I have reinstated the firm support of Brazil, and not only Brazil, but of the entire region towards Argentina's claim of its sovereignty over the Malvinas Islands.
Meanwhile, Argentina's foreign minister says he plans to discuss measures against the UK in the upcoming meeting of the South Atlantic Peace and Cooperation Zone. Hector Timmermans says London has violated a key anti-nuclear treaty by deploying nuclear-armed submarines to the Malvinas. In 1982, London and Buenos Aires fought a brief war over the territory, which is also known as the Falklands. Buenos Aires claims sovereignty over the islands, which lie east of Argentina's coast. From Washington, I'm joined by Gretchen Small with the Executive Intelligence Review. Welcome to the programme, madam. Ms. Small, what does the South American support for Argentina's sovereignty over Malvinas mean for Britain's military presence in the area?
Well, I think it's a good blow to Britain's even stronger, to Britain's presence in the area as a whole. They, what militarily they can do, we have to head this war off. This yet another war off on grounds that the British can't handle, right? And those grounds have to be their economic basis, because the City of London and the British Empire is completely bankrupt, and that's really where the Latin Americans who are standing firm with Argentina, just as you said, which is very important. This is where they can, I think. Deal the strongest blow to the British. Let me mention something, if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I just had a chance to review today the President of Argentina's State of the Union speech on March 1st, when she opened the Parliament, the Legislative Assembly there. She not only reiterated the support for the Malvinas, I mean their stance on the Malvinas, that they do not want war, but the Malvinas are theirs, and pointed out that the British have more soldiers there than there are inhabitants on the island. But she hit at the very core of the British Empire because she went after the Bank of England by name, as she said, founded not to benefit the poor, not even to benefit the Queen, not even to benefit the nobles, but to benefit wars, which is what the Bank of England was founded to start. And she said what she went after then the entire monetarist system that the British power is really based on ultimately, and demanded and urged countries like Greece and Europe to join Argentina, which is having spectacular economic growth by applying completely different economic policies. And she pushed a whole program of directed credit and a return to the state actually regulating where the credit goes to build things for the future, for projects, which is, by the way, one of the things that Argentina and Brazil were discussing today when their foreign ministers met. Also, cooperation on nuclear and space development. So I can give you more on this, but I think your listeners needed the headline. This is really quite a speech she gave.
Indeed. And so, Britain is said to have deployed nuclear submarines to the area. Is London resorting to a policy of intimidation, and will it work in your opinion? Will we see another conflict, perhaps?
I fear we will see another conflict. Look, we are on the edge of a total conflict. I think it's not over the Malvinas. I think the question of an attack on Syria and on Iran as a provocation to then actually go to thermonuclear confrontation with an attack on Russia, China, and the other nations of Asia. That's the British game plan. And by the way, that's what Cameron is discussing with Obama in the United States right now.
Indeed. And on that note, we'll leave it there. Many thanks there to Gretchen Small with the Executive Intelligence Review from Washington. Moving on now, Brent crude for April delivery has climbed above $126 a barrel, hitting an 11-month high. Brent crude climbed 88 cents to settle at $126.22 a barrel in London trade. Meanwhile, New York's main contract, West Texas Intermediate crude for delivery in April, finished at $106.71 a barrel. Oil prices have remained high following Iran's decision to cut crude exports to some European countries in response to the EU's sanctions on the country. This has also brought the average price of a gallon of gasoline in the US to over $3.80. US President Barack Obama's job approval rating has plunged to below 50% due to the soaring gas prices. That's while some analysts believe the soaring oil prices indicate Iran's key role in the global energy markets, they also cast doubt on the West's hopes that other oil-producing countries can replace Iranian crude exports.
Clearly, we've seen oil prices and energy prices, especially in the oil area, rise rather appreciably since tensions rose in the Middle East, particularly since we've seen threats off purchase from Iran or to cut off shipments from Iran into the global market, given Iran's importance and given the fact that few people think that the other potential global suppliers could or would fully replace the outflow that might be cut off from Iran. In addition to which, if we expect a worst-case scenario, which I think all hope to avoid here, of a military conflict, then you might have much larger damage to shipping as well as oil production facilities.
A strong voice is emerging at the UN in Geneva as the 19th Human Rights Council meeting continues. Captain Houshang Shahbazi, who landed an Iran Air 727 aircraft, saving hundreds of lives after it failed to deploy the front landing gear, is speaking out against Western sanctions on Iranian airlines. Press TV's Fabien Pierre tells us more.
This is the video that captured the hearts of Iranians and the world at large. Look carefully and you'll notice that the aircraft is being guided to an astonishingly safe landing in spite of the front landing gear failing to deploy. Captain Houshang Shahbazi, who piloted that very Iran Air 727 to safety, has flown to Geneva to speak with a human rights panel on a ticking time bomb.
Unfortunately, sanctions imposed by the Western countries on civilian airlines in Iran have caused a considerable number of plane crashes and have led to the deaths of hundreds of passengers, which, according to the aviation statistics, is above the average death toll from such unfortunate accidents in the world. The sanctions have resulted in technical failures over the last decade due to the dilapidated parts in the aircraft.
Every time a plane goes up in the air, the captain says he is often only able to relax upon safe landing. But the sanction is a lot more grave than it sounds, and here's why. Imagine for a moment that you need new brake pads for your car because the ones you do have are about to fail, and every shop you go to refuses to sell them to you. Now add to that the image of the brake pads actually failing and the family in the backseat suffering the consequences. It's then you begin to understand the fear of pilots and the severity of the sanctions that blocks the sale of vital aircraft parts from Western countries to Iran. So why the Human Rights Council? The captain says it's simple. The sanction violates the UN Declaration to the right of life, of not just him, but passengers.
According to Article 2 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in the Declaration without distinction of any kind. Furthermore, no distinction shall be made on the distinction of political, jurisdictional, or international status of the country or territory to which a person belongs.
Some progress has been made, however, as talks with the Ukraine have yielded positive results, and the captain hopes the petition he has started, already garnering over 100,000 signatures, will reach the ear of US President Barack Obama, who the captain believes continues to follow the status quo. For now, anxiety grows and apprehension pervades as each day at the landing strip or even in the air, there is knowledge that a large-scale tragedy may be nearing its future fulfillment, and no captain with any amount of skill may be able to do this and live to tell the tale. Fabian Pear, Press TV, Geneva.
Safe landing indeed. Well, the Press TV correspondent and cameraman abducted by a Libyan militia have called on their captors to immediately release them. In a video message, Press TV reporter Nick Jones and his cameraman Gareth Montgomery Johnson say they were looking forward to being freed and seeing their families. The two were abducted along with their local guides on February 22nd by the Swelly Brigade. They were first accused of illegal entry. The militia later announced that the two were being held on suspicion of espionage. A spokesperson for the group says they have now been transferred to the Libyan National Transitional Council. However, the NTC has not yet confirmed that the two are now in its custody. The joint UN Arab League envoy to Syria, Kofi Annan, has held talks with top Turkish officials and Syrian opposition leaders in Ankara. Annan stressed that the unrest in Syria should come to an end by finding a political solution. Press TV's Mehdi Gholizadeh reports. The following reports does contain flash photography though.
The United Nations and the Arab League envoy to Syria, Kofi Annan, has held talks with top Turkish officials and Syrian opposition leaders in Ankara as part of his efforts to accomplish his mission to end the unrest in Syria. Annan stressed that he will try to bring the Syrian administration and the opposition at the table to find a political solution to the Syrian crisis. Former UN Secretary-General, in his meeting with Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoğlu, briefed them about the latest developments he had witnessed since the start of his mission. The Syrian figures that held talks with Annan were headed by the leader of Syrian National Council, Borhan Galyon. Annan termed the negotiations as constructive.
We had constructive discussions as to my approach and how the future development of the process would be. And they have also promised their full cooperation, which will be necessary if we are going to succeed.
The Syrian opposition leader said there are a number of countries ready to arm the Syrian opposition forces, but stressed that the Syrian opposition's main goal is to find a political solution to the problem in Syria. This comes as the Syrian opposition has so far rejected talks with the Syrian administration.
Kofi Annan is trying to bring the Syrian administration and the opposition together for talks, but the opposition does not consider the move as positive. Such efforts are unlikely to bear fruit, as the Syrian administration and the opposition cannot trust each other.
Annan also said he has presented a set of complete proposals to the Syrian administration and is waiting for the response from Damascus.
Observers believe that the result of Annan's negotiations in Ankara will be a key factor in shaping the outcome of his tough mission to find a solution to the unrest in Syria.
Turkey has been at the forefront of multinational efforts to force Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to step down. Turkey plans to host the next meeting of the so-called Friends of Syria group in Istanbul next month. Now it remains to be seen how Turkey's stance towards Syria could impact the prospects for a political solution to end the unrest in Syria. Mehdi Orlizadeh, Press TV, Ankara.